Hey everybody, Adam Savage in the collection part of my cave this time, because that's germane to the subject of this video. Among the objects I collect, movie props and pieces of computer history and medical history and other strange tools and things, I also pay attention to books. This is, I think, the oldest book in my whole library collection. This is an 1881 treatise on billiards that is in French. I picked this up. My dad ended up buying this for me back when I was 19 and playing pool 3 or 4 hours a day. We were at a rare bookseller and he showed me this and I drooled over it, not on it, but my dad ended up buying this for me for my birthday. I also have in my maker library a couple of excellent volumes 1 and 2 of Practical Carpentry. This was published in 1912. I became aware of these incredible books by visiting the White House Woodshop back in 2015. Books are among the things that I collect, and I am not alone. They're throughout history. Weirdos like me have collected stuff and eventually put their collections on display. It's called a museum. I hope one day to turn this collection into an interactive museum because I love sharing these things with other people and talking about their tales. And every major city and even many minor cities have some wonderful museums devoted to highly esoteric subject matter, lovingly described by its curators and its docents. And San Francisco is no exception. And I recently got to visit the wonderful and beautiful Museum of Bookbinding and learn all about the machines and the iterative process of the Industrial Revolution, learning how to print books at scale. It was a fascinating journey and I can't wait to show it to you. Madeline, tell me where we are. Tell me, this is how bookbinding used to work, is that right?
Basically, the big noise in bookbinding comes around 400 Common Era, when they start sewing what are called signatures, these gathers together, and they have to sew them through the fold in order. Okay, this is
no. And so people don't. I don't know if people realize that all books are built this way, right? With folded leaves that are joined in sections.
This is called a signature, and it's a sheet of paper that can have up to 64 pages. Of course, you have to have a machine fold that because it's insanely thick.
Right.
But in most cases, this is an octavo. It is sort of the standard building block of a book. So you have this folded thing, and you want to sew it to the other folded things and keep them in order. The whole point of a book is to protect the information that's inside it.
Right.
So what you would do is these supports are there to unify the package and give strength to it. So you go into the hole at the far end, come out the next hole, which is here. And usually they would do it in sort of an orientation like this. And you could go sometimes around several times, depending on how large the book was going to be and how much support you wanted to give it.
So the more support, the more times you would go around.
And then back into that same hole, pull it snugly. And you always go to the outside of where you're sewing.
You go to the front and then
then come back to, where are you?
And so these were individually tied every time you were making a book, and they're tensioned by these guys.
Yep. And at the end, you sew back through.
When somebody had to do this as a job, how many signatures, do you know what their numbers they were trying to hit were?
Well, if you were doing this for a job, you just used up all the signatures in the book.
Right.
A client would come to a bookbinder with a big stack of paper, which he had bought from a printer or a bookseller, and say, bind my book. And every book was bespoke. So you would not only say, bind my book, but I want it covered in this kind of leather.
Oh, wow.
I want an edge treatment, or I don't want an edge treatment. An edge treatment is there to keep dust and bugs and things like that out of the paper because paper is vulnerable.
Is that why they used to metallicize the edge of paper?
Gilding is really good because, one, you can slide the dust off it, or the tweenie or whoever is doing the dusting can do that. You're living in a world where they're burning things all the time to cook and to light and to heat. So there's dust, there's ash, there's schmutz. So you could wipe it off, but also it's difficult. If water falls on it, it will beat up before it soaks in. And bookworms are not adorable children. Bookworms are actually very destructive, so you want to keep those out. So, and then at the end, I just do a little kettle stitch here, come through, and I'm ready to add.
And then you go back the other way. Back
And then you
forth.
cut them off, and you use these to tie on the cover.
Oh, wait, and so these would be those ridges on the back of the
exactly.
cover. Oh, okay.
Those are not a feature. Those are not a bug. Those are a feature. You want them there, aside from anything else, because they advertise the strength and durability
That
of
it
the
has
book.
been hand
Hand-sewn, and that it's a sturdy book with lots of attachments.
I had no idea.
Well, they don't. You know, most people look at a book and it's like looking at an apple. It's a thing.
Well, also, your definition right at the front really rocked me. I had not thought of a book as a machine for protecting the information inside.
Yep, it's a jar.
It's a jar. Okay, so this is like the oldest industrialized bookbinding?
This starts around mostly in and this is all European bookbinding.
Okay, right. There were other techniques in other countries.
God, yes. But this starts around 400 or 500.
That early?
Yeah.
I
Up
had
to that
no
point,
idea.
it had been wax tablets, codices, which are like this, but it was one. Oh, Anita's got one.
Oh, okay.
This is a really early book, and what they did was take papyrus or vellum or something and tack it down the center. Those are just stitched through.
Sewn through with leather.
Yep.
Leather.
And the nice thing about this leather is then you can
Right,
protect it. But the problem with this is that if you have an 800-page book, it's going to be like,
It's going to be like your wallet when you have too much stuff in it. And this is how books were before people came up with this.
So bookbinding is a 1,000-year-long process of trial and error and improvement incrementally. And each time they come up with something, it's like, oh, hey, this is cool. Let's do it this way. But because it's a guild trade, kind of every guild in every country comes to the same conclusions, but they don't share. You don't want them to know what you do it, because then they'll know and they might take your business, and that would be bad.
So what is the progression from this process? What is the next natural?
Oh, in terms of the book itself?
In terms of the book
next
itself,
thing you got to do is you have to round the back, because it's actually thicker here with all the thread running through the spine.
Oh, right, all the folds.
Then this is not a great example because it's such a small piece. So what you would do is put it, they love their hammers, there. And what you want is that kind of mushroom-shaped.
That's sort of that business going on.
That business going on. And then.
And again, that's a feature. That's part of the process that holds it nice and tight.
And you also want to push the last signature on each end out to make a resting place for the back of your cover. That's called rounding and backing. And what you want is something like that.
Which is my understanding of how books are, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what they should feel like.
Exactly. It's that sort of mushroom-shaped thing. Everything in a book has a real reason. Yeah. It's so cool. Once you've done that, then you want to take off all those folds.
Oh, right. So where it's been folded at the top and bottom, it needs to be...
if you want to get in there.
Gotcha.
There was a sort of period, I think it's mostly Victorian, where people were actually cutting their own because nobody had ever seen the insides of their beautiful virgin pages. But if you do that, you can't gild the tops.
Right.
There are other things that you can't do. So in most cases, the binder would trim. This is a plow.
Oh my God, that's beautiful. It's like a plain...
Wicked sharp.
I can see. Oh my gosh.
I have learned this.
You have cut yourself with this?
Oh yeah. Not this particular one, but one fell when I was moving it, and I made the mistake of trying to cut it. And that was...
and it returned the favor.
Oh yeah.
So it's a plane for the edge of
it's
pages.
basically, and they originally used draw knives, but this works a lot better, and you would only cut off 1 or 2 or 3 pages at a time. Any more than that, and you risk tearing the book, and you don't want to do that because it's not your book.
So you would be advancing the blade with each pass just a little bit. 2
Much
or 3
faster
pages.
than I do.
That's like 15,000.
Oh, yeah.
So it's very small.
And if you're doing all 3 edges, which you probably are, you go through your 15 pages, 15,000 pages, and then you flip it and keep going. But at the end, you have a fully open book. Now, if you're gonna do an edge treatment, you're gonna use something like this. This is a,
Oh, like so smooth.
well, that's because I have, demonstrating this, I have scraped it down.
Oh, wow.
Or we have scraped it down a whole lot. But the idea is to get this as smooth as a baby's butt, as my father used to say. You would have put talc or something like that between the pages beforehand. Then you tighten this to the point where it
allows them to settle.
Yeah, it allows them to settle, but it also means that when you open it, you can maybe get the pages to, because paper is fiber and water. And if you really screw it together, it may not come apart again, and you don't want that to happen.
Gotcha.
And then you would put a mild adhesive on, sprinkle on some Armenian bowl, which is a red clay. And you do that mostly just because the gold will look better on
with
top of a red back.
underlayment.
Yeah,
That's
otherwise
always
it
the
looks
case. Gold always has a red underlayment.
well, because on white, it looks a little apologetic and thin. And if you're paying for gold, there should be gold.
So this is the advanced step for gilding the edge.
For gilding. And then you put down your gold leaf, which is insanely thin, and you basically just kind of burnish it
in.
on.
Can I see this? This
sure.
is a...
They
And
are
that-
frequently referred to as agates, even though they were not always agate. But it had to be something with that kind of level of polish and smoothness.
Oh my goodness, that's beautiful. Is this original?
I don't know.
Yeah. What a thing. That's the largest burnisher I've ever seen.
Well, when you're working on big...
Yeah,
you
no,
want-
I can see. And every one of these hand machines is so beefy for being able to apply the force.
And this was your livelihood, so you got to be pretty fast at it. You weren't sort of, I'm kind of going slowly because it's not my livelihood
Right.
and I don't want to break anything.
But if you were doing this for a living, you needed to turn around.
Oh yeah, fast. So you've now got a book that's sort of like this. Those are the cords.
Right.
And
There's
it's
the
been,
rounded back and-
there's been some glue put on, and then you would put on a covering.
Right.
And in most cases, this was in the early days, it was leather. You could cover it with vellum, you could cover it with fabric. Queen Elizabeth I supposedly liked velvet, which is why a lot of the books from her court look like hell, because all of the nap has been
velvet.
worn off and it just doesn't look good. Leather holds up a lot better, and there were all sorts of different kinds of leather that they used, yes, including human skin, which is boring, unless you were the human concerned. So they would put glue on, they would pare down the edges really thin so that when you folded it over, you wouldn't get a ridge.
Right, right.
And then you would put your leather on and massage it into all of those spaces.
So you'd sit there with tooling.
and tightening it up and making sure that there was a hinge spot.
Would
and,
they dampen the leather to do that?
well,
right.
the glue dampened the leather.
Ah, okay. So
And-
while the glue is setting, you're doing
Yeah,
the burnishing.
you're doing this. And at this point, you're possibly using paste instead of glue because the paste can be undone and it doesn't set up quite as fast. The glue was, collagen glue was made from bones and things like that, smelled to high heaven and set up much faster.
So the ability to undo, like I know I watch a lot of luthiers on YouTube, and there's a real ethos to like not use white glue because it can't be undone, but use rabbit skin and other glue.
Things like that, because it allows you to get that wrinkle out of there.
And to fix it later.
And fix it if you have to be.
Yeah,
and you can actually, with paste, you can dampen it and take it off the board if you have to.
So this is one being disassembled.
Yeah.
Okay, and they'd skive the edges super
Yep,
thin.
really. Ah, that's a technical term.
It is, yeah.
I
It's a
didn't even
leather.
say sky. It's such a good word.
It is such a good word. It's almost onomatopoeic, right?
Yes. So by this time, you finally got your book, and if you are, sort of the person who does not believe in ungodly show, you take your nice book home. But if you are the Duke of something, you want an arming mark or decoration, and this is where bookbinding was a badly paid profession.
Interesting.
It was at the end of the process in publishing, when I worked in publishing, the last people in line were always the ones who had to make up for the other people being dilatory and things like that. But this, if you were good, this was where you made your money.
Really? The embossing?
The embossing and tooling, because it's all hand done. We will pretend that this is heated. We will pretend that that is heat. If I stamp on there, and it is now a heated tool, and I stamp on the leather, And leather is pretty soft, so it will take a hand impression pretty.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So
And you put
let's say that's just a blind emboss. There's no color. I then go through and I paint in a little bit of glare, which is the adhesive I used for gilding before. It's egg whites. And then I put a piece of gold leaf over it. I reheat my tool, and I come down in exactly the same place. Wow. Yeah, really. If you have the eye-hand coordination to do this properly.
So that's how you got foil onto the same place.
Yep. And
That's just as laborious as I would have thought. It can't be that laborious.
And it's not just laborious. If you are off by a millimeter, it's going to look blurry.
And this is late in the process. You don't have the luxury of screwing.
It's what you screw it up, but this is all done by hand.
That is all done by hand?
All done by hand. Isn't that gorgeous?
And so in each of these, they've taken a stamp. They've impressed the leather and then used the impression to put glue in. Then they've come back and added the gold leaf.
So this is how books are made until about the 1820s.
Okay.
All of Jane Austen's books were made this way.
Bespoke, one at a time.
Well, by that time there were also editions, but they were made, each book was made by hand, and they were very plainly covered if you were buying them, for a library or something like that. So the big shift to the Industrial Revolution comes when they break the process into two parts. There is the text block,
Right.
and there is the cover. So while somebody is making the text block, somebody else in a whole other shop, perhaps, is making the covers that will go on it.
And that's a big advancement. Formerly, it was all done in the same shop.
It's huge. They also start using pasteboard and cloth in preference to leather, which was more expensive and to some extent more fiddly. They also go to a quicker and nominally easier and certainly cheaper form of sewing, which is recessed cord sewing. And what they do for that is to...
This looks very much like the other machine you were showing me.
It does until you know. They cut with saws.
Oh, it's an actual
channels.
divot. Okay.
Yeah. So you go in as you did with the other at the end.
Right. But now those cords won't show through the leather cover,
Right. They won't show through, and you just go right over it and trap it.
Oh, so it's much faster.
It's way faster. If you look at the image above of the Harper Brothers factory in 1855, the women who are sewing on the fourth floor are expected to do 200 books a day this way.
200 stacks of signatures per day.
Yep.
What?
And
200 books per day?
Yeah. They were considered bookbinding professionals.
In 10 hours, that's 20 books an hour.
Yeah.
That's a book every 3 minutes.
I did this as a demonstration at the Dickens Fair one year, and I think I got up to 7.
In an hour?
In an hour.
That's impressive.
I would have starved so fast. So it's the same thing. The trouble is, it's not as sturdy a binding, and it's possible to pull those cords right out.
So like every advancement, there are trade-offs.
Yeah, and the books are being made faster, but they're not being made better necessarily.
Right,
They're
right.
just being made. So this was a huge deal, and
When does this advancement come about?
not for another 60 years. The 1880s. Basically, an Irish-American immigrant named David McConnell Smythe invents this. This is the first commercially viable book sewing machine, the Smythe number 3.
I see all the thread. It looks like a serger sewing machine.
It's nuts. You put the page on here. There are little sharp, wicked barbs that come up and punch holes.
Oh, okay. So it's an automatic hole punching.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Automatic
Yeah.
hole punching at the same time that this thing is moving up and around here.
Okay.
And there are needles that are fastened to those over there that
Oh, and I see the shape of that needle is almost like the shape of the thread grabber in a sewing machine.
It comes like that.
Yes.
And then another needle comes out and puts another stitch through that loop. This retracts. It is an insane mechanism.
So each thing, a piece of thread comes through, gets grabbed, another one comes through,
Yeah.
and then and all of this while you're adding more to this as it's turning.
Backed up to here, so you get this sheet there, and the next one comes over and up and gets stitched to it.
To it? Oh, wow.
Yeah. So one of these could do, I think, 56, they boasted 56 books a minute. Yeah.
What?
One of these could do 2,000 a day, which would replace 10 of the women on the sewing floor.
It's really amazing. This is all pre us all agreeing on what inches are. So everything on this had to be produced in the same factory.
Yep.
Every last bit. It's crazy.
The patent drawings for these are just
Oh, I'm just looking at the machine
mind-boggling.
label over here. This is really lovely. 1879, 1887, all the different patents for it. And this must have been in incredibly high demand.
I imagine so. I mean, I don't know that I've actually read anything specifically about it, but yeah, once you could do this, why would you want to be, doing it by hand?
And all of a sudden, books are available to many more people because the process has been made
This
cheaper.
whole process, it's like by the 1880s, the people who were making the books could afford to buy books.
Oh, until then it wasn't really,
It was getting better, and there are, a book is not always the same kind of book. You could be, you could have a dime novel, or you could have one of those elaborate sets of Dickens on the mantelpiece to show everybody how erudite you were. The amount of money that you had dictated a lot of what you could own.
Right.
And in America, particularly because you've got a growing emphasis on education and seen as the key to bettering yourself, it's a huge thing.
Right.
You want moral education, so there's a lot of pamphlets and books about how to be more godly and virtuous, and facts, and there's all this stuff that's just out there.
We've lived through a couple of sort of media paradigm shifts in the last 40, 50 years.
Yes, we
and
have.
I'm curious if studying the origins of bookbinding gives you an interesting perspective on the level of emotionality around these paradigm shifts. I mean, because I would imagine that there were people complaining that there were too many books going to too many people back then.
Oh, well, I mean, certainly in the earliest days, books are not only to protect the information, but to protect the information from it falling into the hands of the wrong people.
Of the common people,
The common people, who wouldn't know how to use all this important education.
So the expense was a barrier to entry.
Yeah. And they locked books onto shelves to keep them from walking away.
Oh, really?
Uh,
But they were very valuable objects.
They were exceptionally valuable.
Right.
But also, you didn't want somebody else to know what you knew, because then they'd know. And you can't have that.
So then a lot of these machines must be sort of the apex of sequestered information from each factory or inventor that produced it.
I suspect so. I mean, I haven't thought of it in those terms, but I suspect so. Certainly within the guilds, you did not want the guy in the next guild over to know all your trade secrets, because that gave you a competitive advantage.
Sure.
And so.
Now we're standing next to this gigantic thing which looks like architectural, but it's actually the operating lever of this beautiful machine.
Oh, this is the Palmer and Ray. Palmer and Ray was a San Francisco company.
Oh, they were?
Yeah. So this is a native son. And they did not give up on beauty.
Oh, look at that. There's even the little, oh my goodness, the little filigree.
And here and on the sides, the whole thing is beautiful as well as deadly. You move it forward just a
And that's just the
smidge.
clamp for holding the books down.
And
that's the blade, which looks still plenty sharp.
now I want you to move because I don't want to hit you in the head.
Oh!
I did that badly, but.
Are you kidding? That was amazing.
Well, usually I can just do it very smoothly, but I started out badly. And bookbinders have always sold the scrap back to the paper mills.
I can't get enough of how. And so when was this being produced?
This is between 1884 and 1892.
Okay.
That's when Palmer and Ray was. And there are lots of other guillotines. They were not the only manufacturer.
Yeah, but I mean, these castings are so surpassingly lovely. Like, I love all the unnecessary but beautiful detail.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what is the next step from this process?
We have now basically turned out a fully bound text block.
Okay.
It will have, our rounder backer isn't here, but the back would have been rounded and backed.
Well, I think it's worth letting the audience understand too that the sewing allows the book to be opened
fully,
like perfect binding. You've heard it crack when you open it up, but this really allowed you to both read the book and
all
it was
the
protective.
way in.
Yeah. Okay. So this is
your text block.
All
now they have to make the case, and the case is something like this. It's just basically cloth covered cardboard
with a hinge
for the back. Up to this point, the way that this stuff is tougher than it looks. Anybody who's ever tried to cut cardboard with a knife or scissors.
Cut myself doing it.
Oh yeah. So instead of that, what they would do is somebody would come to the factory in the morning and set up the cuts, and you would.
Oh, that's the holder, and that's the shear.
And it just cuts through it like butter. It's beautiful. So that some guy who was operating this machine, who called himself a bookbinder, although probably he didn't have any of the other craft, would sit there just lopping pieces of paper all day to make covers. And then
just cutting cardboard to size.
Yeah. Now, by this time, I think the first machine to actually add to the decorative side of it was the Imperial Arming Press, which came in about 1832. I am boggling my numbers today.
It just seems like the whole 19th century was this fever of improvement for bookbinding.
Yes, it's that Victorian spiral of upward improvement, which shows up in all sorts of things.
Right.
But so in order to make it prettier, you want some sort of decorative element.
Right, sure.
And so they discovered that this stuff is way too hard to use a hand stamp on.
Leather is nice and soft.
Leather is soft and agreeable. It will do whatever you want.
But this fabric on the cardboard.
No, is not interested. And the fabric, it took them about 10 years to get the fabric right, because at first they used unsized fabric and the glue would seep through and then it would be icky. So it took them a while to figure out what fabrics worked best. But this is a sized fabric, and they would use a machine like this. You would put an embossing plate with the shape you wanted embossed in there.
Yeah.
And then put it in, pull, you get the embossed.
That's your operating lever.
That's your operating lever.
It puts a tremendous amount of pressure on
And this is heat. Probably it's heated iron bars that they would put in there.
So they would.
Sometimes it was gas. Sometimes some sort of gas flame. Sometimes it was heated iron bars. Later it became electric, but you needed a source of heat.
Wow. So I love this idea, right? This is pre-electricity. So if you want heat, you just have to heat something up and bring it over here.
Yeah. What else?
Also, I mean, and this is sort of a really advanced version of the oldest kind of book press, right?
Well, that's actually a copy press, and I could do a whole diversion on that one. Let's not.
Okay.
But this is, all presses are, I mean, the printing press works essentially the same way.
Yeah.
And before that, there were presses that were pressing all sorts of other things. Gutenberg did not invent the printing press. He just invented movable type made of metal, because the Chinese already had movable type made of porcelain. I hate to break anybody's heart about this one, but Gutenberg was a smart guy. I don't want to downplay his
I love we came to the Museum of Bookbinding and get some dirt on Gutenberg.
Oh, yeah, man. He didn't pay his bills.
Oh.
Which is why we know about the printing press, because his backer took him to court, won the press, and took it all over Germany doing essentially a look what I've got roadshow. And Gutenberg had wanted to keep it all for himself, because then everybody else would know.
Would come to one place.
Yeah. So
that's how the printing press spreads? Is that
basically, yeah.
is
Gutenberg.
parsimonious and won't pay his bills.
Yeah, well, it cost a lot of money to do all this stuff. And
Yeah.
he kept borrowing money and was not so timely about paying it back. So this machine, which is actually kind of an outlier, both printed and foiled and embossed.
All
so
at the same
it could
time.
produce a cover like that.
In the fabric. And
Yeah.
is this a fabric cover?
Yeah.
Wow. Because it's so smooth.
Well, because it's a sizing.
Right. Is this considered sort of like a garish kind of cover?
By this time, these were not really garish. There was a whole phalanx of women who were bookbinding designers. And this is Margaret Armstrong, which you can tell because she signed all her books. There's an MA
Really?
there.
Oh, look at that.
And if you are into this sort of thing, there are a number of wonderful designers. This was something that a woman could do who was middle class, needed a little money, but she was not working out of the house. It was art, so that was okay.
I love the fact that there were artists
Yeah.
exhibiting their aesthetic into the covers and the pieces.
the Art Nouveau, you can look at, we had a show a few years ago about our collection of Victorian publishers' bindings, and you can watch both the technology change and the aesthetic change. The Belle Epoque covers are amazing and gorgeous and fiddly and could not have been done if they hadn't reached that point in technology.
Right.
So there's a whole lot of stuff that sort of stands on each other's back.
It's such a, I hadn't thought of, I mean, of course it makes sense. It's such an iterative process. Each of these improvements allows more books to be gotten, more people are paying for them. That allows the industry to grow.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's just really, really thrilling. Madeline, thank you so much for walking me through this.
Oh, well, obviously I kind of like this.
It is such a deep well. I'm going to come back and get the press speech.
Oh yeah, I can do the whole press speech.